What does a city do with the parts of itself it cannot bear to look at? Not the grand boulevards, not the cathedrals, not the monuments polished for tourists and postcards. I mean the parts it hides. The stink, the waste, the shame. The human lives it would rather push out of sight. If you want to know what a civilization really is, sometimes you have to stop looking at its face and start looking at what it buries. And Victor Hugo, honestly, loved doing exactly that. Near the end of Les Misérables, the uprising has failed. The barricades are broken. The young idealists are dead or scattered. Marius is badly wounded, and Jean Valjean is carrying him through Paris in a desperate attempt to escape. A normal novelist, at that moment, would tighten the pace. The footsteps of the pursuers would get closer. The breathing would get shorter. The reader would keep turning pages faster and faster. Hugo does something completely insane. Just when the story should be sprinting, he swerves into the Paris sewers and starts giving us a serious, extended meditation on filth, drainage, waste, underground tunnels, and the hidden anatomy of the city. And not for 2 paragraphs, he really goes in. He writes about it with such energy that you almost start wondering whether he accidentally became possessed by the spirit of a municipal engineer. But that is exactly why this passage matters. Welcome to my channel. This is To the Lighthouse. Here, we move through the fog of history in search of that small flicker of human light. And today, I want to talk about one of the strangest, darkest, and frankly smelliest parts of Les Misérables, a section that feels like a detour, yet might actually be one of the deepest and most ruthless passages in the entire novel. Not a detour. Let me say the main point early. Hugo is not getting distracted here. He is doing one of the things he does best. He is dragging to the surface a truth that the city would rather keep underground. That is true not only in Les Misérables, but in so much of 19th century literature. Balzac does it when he tears open the social machinery of Restoration France. Dickens does it when he walks through the fog and filth of London and shows you how industrial modernity feeds on children, debt, and exhaustion. Dostoevsky does it in St. Petersburg, where the streets themselves seem to sweat guilt and fever. Zola later does it with even less mercy, turning the modern city into a laboratory of appetite, rot, class, and pressure. Hugo belongs to that world of writers who look at modern civilization and say, "All right, very impressive facade. Now let us see what is going on behind the wallpaper." So yes. If you are reading Les Misérables for the first time, the sewer chapter can feel outrageous. Hugo is never a disciplined minimalist. He does not move in a straight line. He writes about Waterloo, convents, slang, law, religion, poverty, revolution, street children, class hypocrisy, and the entire moral weather system of 19th century France. For him, the novel is not a neat plot machine. It is a giant container, almost a whole civilization in prose. Still, even by Hugo standards, the sewer passage feels extreme. The contrast is so sharp. One second it is a matter of life and death. The next second it becomes a full underground lecture on the hidden circulation system of Paris. The shift is so abrupt that it feels almost aggressive, as if Hugo is grabbing the reader by the collar and forcing their face into the mud. And that is the clue. A writer as theatrical as Hugo knew exactly what he was doing. He knew this would interrupt the rhythm. He knew it would frustrate readers. He does it anyway because the sewer is not a background detail. It is not scenery, it is the point. In a strange way, Hugo has hidden the spiritual core of Les Misérables in the place where polite society would least want to go. Under Paris. Why does the sewer matter so much? Because in this novel, the Paris sewer is not just a physical space, it is a moral space. Think about the Paris above ground. It is the city of boulevards, churches, uniforms, law courts, ceremony, monuments, salons, and codes of behavior. It is the city that presents itself as civilized, enlightened, modern, and orderly. This is the Paris of public performance, the Paris that wants to be admired. But Hugo is obsessed with flipping that surface over and showing you what lies underneath. In Les Misérables, he keeps returning to people whom respectable society would rather not see. Jean Valjean is a former convict branded by the law. Fantine is a woman used up and cast aside by a society that loves morality in theory and cruelty in practice. Cosette is a child almost erased into silence. Gavroche is one of those street children who seem, in the eyes of the state, to exist halfway between person and debris. The young men at the barricade become, from the perspective of official order, disposable trouble. This is one of the great themes of 19th century realism and romantic social critique alike. Not just Hugo, but writers across Europe kept asking the same question. Who gets seen as fully human by modern society, and who gets pushed into the shadows? You can feel that question in Dickens, in Oliver Twist, and Bleak House. You can feel it in Dostoevsky's underground figures, in Gorky's drifters, even in Flaubert, though his method is colder and more ironic. Literature keeps going where polite society does not want to look, and the sewer becomes the most direct metaphor for that whole system. Above ground, Paris displays itself. Below ground, Paris hides itself. The surface is civilization's face. The underground is where civilization sends what it wants removed. A city shows you its squares and opera houses. It does not show you the dark channels where its waste flows. Yet Hugo takes Jean Valjean and Marius and throws them into exactly that hidden zone. That is not accidental. Hugo understands that the true moral test of a society is not how beautiful its public image is, but how it handles what it considers impure, shameful, burdensome, or inconvenient. The same is true of individuals. What you say about yourself matters. But how you deal with your own shadow, your own guilt, your own discarded things, often matters more. In that sense, the sewer is the unconscious of Paris. It is the underside of civilization. It is the place where the city stores its denied truths. Above ground, Paris says, "Look how refined I am." Below ground, the sewer says, "Let us not flatter ourselves too quickly." Filth and grace. But if this passage were only about exposing urban hypocrisy, it would already be powerful, yet not quite devastating. What makes it extraordinary is that Hugo also places redemption there. Jean Valjean carrying Marius through the sewer is not just an escape sequence, it feels like a descent. He is not moving directly toward heroic light. He is moving downward into darkness, into stench, into confusion, into a maze where every step threatens suffocation, burial, or disappearance. The imagery is almost spiritual. You could even say it has the structure of an underworld journey. And Hugo is exactly the kind of writer who would think in those terms. He is deeply shaped by Christian imagination, even when he becomes politically radical and morally expansive in ways that strain traditional orthodoxy. He believes in sin, suffering, grace, and transfiguration, but he does not place them safely inside institutions. He finds them in prisons, streets, brothels, barricades, and sewers. Jean Valjean has never been just a fugitive. He is a man carrying his past, his stigma, his debt to others, and his fragile moral rebirth. Ever since Bishop Myriel changed the course of his life, Valjean has existed as someone who must keep proving, through action, that a human being is more than the label society stamps onto him. And here, Hugo gives that moral burden a physical form. Valjean literally carries another man through the bowels of the city. That image is unforgettable because Hugo refuses to stage salvation in a clean, noble setting. There is no radiant chapel. No tidy, heroic rescue, no audience, no applause. Instead, there is muck, suffocating air, slime, fear, and total invisibility. This matters because Hugo is making a claim about what goodness actually is. Real morality, in Les Misérables, is not standing in a clean room saying beautiful things. Real redemption is not looking merciful from a position of comfort. It is the willingness to go down into what is foul, humiliating, and dangerous, and carry someone out. That is why Valjean becomes so immense as a character, not simply because he is kind, but because he is willing to descend. He enters the part of society everyone else denies, and there, in the deepest filth, he performs an act of grace. I have always loved novels that dare to make moral truth ugly before they make it beautiful. Hugo is one of the masters of that. He does not let redemption arrive looking elegant. He makes it smell terrible first. Waste. And Hugo is still not done. Because this passage is also about something that obsessed the 19th century in a very modern way: waste. Today, when we hear that word, we might think of trash bins, recycling rules, plastic, and urban sanitation. But in Hugo's time, waste was tied to a much bigger question. Modern cities were expanding, reorganizing, rationalizing themselves. Paris in the 19th century was becoming a capital of spectacle, administration, and infrastructure. Progress was everywhere in the language of the age: improvement, order, circulation, efficiency. But modernity was producing waste at the same time it was celebrating itself. That waste was material, of course: sewage, pollution, decay, overcrowding. Yet it was also social: poverty, displacement, labor used up and discarded, women abandoned after exploitation, children left to fend for themselves, former prisoners marked for life, whole classes of people treated as residue. Hugo is intensely alert to this. In his view, the sewer carries not only filth, but squandered value. He even reflects on how much usable matter and wealth a city allows to rot away because it lacks wisdom and moral seriousness. And once you notice that language, it becomes impossible not to see the larger metaphor. Waste in Les Misérables is never only about sewage. It is about human beings judged disposable. Fantine is treated as disposable. Valjean was once judged permanently ruined. The poor, the unemployed, the orphaned, the criminalized, the sexually exploited, all these people are pushed by respectable society into the category of refuse. Society first crushes them, then recoils from them, then calls them dirty. That pattern does not belong only to Hugo's Paris. Dickens saw it in London. Dostoevsky saw it in Russia, where bureaucracy, poverty, and moral humiliation could turn a person into something socially invisible. Later, Kafka would transform that logic into nightmare. And if I am being honest, this is one reason Les Misérables still feels so modern. We still live in societies that are very good at generating human waste and then pretending the waste generated itself. So the question Hugo forces on us is brutal. Is a society merely managing waste, or is it manufacturing waste and then blaming the broken? Are some people truly worthless, or does a system first grind them down and then pinch its nose in disgust? Once you read the sewer this way, it stops being a weird digression and starts looking like the novel's hidden courtroom. By this point, the image of Valjean carrying Marius becomes even richer. He is not only carrying an injured young man. He is carrying the novel's whole moral argument through the darkest region of civilization. One person bearing another through the most humiliating, hidden, and unbearable parts of the social world. Trying to bring him back into light, that is Hugo's humanism in one image. And Hugo's humanism is not soft. That is important. It is compassionate, yes, but it is also accusatory. It asks not merely whether we feel pity, but whether we are willing to confront the systems that create misery and then bury the evidence. That is why Hugo spends so many pages on the Paris sewer. He is not showing off random knowledge. He is not merely indulging a taste for grotesque details. He is telling us that the truth of a civilization lies not in its glittering surfaces, but in what it does with its darkness. The truth of a person lies not in polished language, but in whether they are willing to enter degradation and still choose love. I think that is one of the reasons Les Misérables has survived so powerfully. It gives you drama, romance, revolution, unforgettable characters, and all the emotional force people expect. But underneath all that, it keeps asking a much more uncomfortable question. What kind of world calls itself civilized while hiding its misery underground? Above ground, Paris belongs to law, order, and public dignity. Below ground, Paris belongs to secrecy, filth, denial, and truth. And when Jean Valjean emerges from that underworld still carrying Marius, Hugo seems to be saying that no one can bring another person back to the light without first passing through the darkest parts of the world. So the next time you read Les Misérables, and Hugo suddenly starts talking about the Paris sewers, do not rush to assume he has lost the plot. He has found it. He is not writing about infrastructure for its own sake. He is writing about the place where a society hides the evidence of its own soul. And that, I think, is why this passage lingers, because the sewer is disgusting, yes, But it is also honest. It tells the truth the boulevard cannot. If you liked the video today, please subscribe. See you at the next lighthouse.